What's up, Wizards? Welcome back to another collaboration with Chris Warnock of Renaissance Astrology, who is over to my side, and me, Michael Beeson of Hacking Fate. So this is Aphorism 2 of the Centiloquium. I'm going to come up with all kinds of interesting ways to mispronounce that. Like every time I'll say it a different way. So we've already covered the first one. So if you want to go back and review that, you can. And the introduction, I'm totally going to stop giving a recap starting next time. So would you like me to read this one, or would you like to read this one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So when he that asketh a question shall better consider it, he shall find that there is but little difference between the thing sought and the idea thereof in the mind. So what's an idea and what's the mind? I don't understand this at all, Chris.
Okay. So this is getting into this again, this is really weird if you think about it. Sort of like, what do you mean little difference in the thing and the idea of it? Because basically our conception of reality is that I'm this body, right? And it has a brain, and I'm kind of behind, like, if you remember in Men in Black, they had the alien, it was a little guy inside the, riding around. That's sort of what we're like. There's a little guy inside me, right? Behind my eyes, that's where I am. And I'm looking out, right? Or the brain is looking out, and the brain sort of thinks the way the gallbladder produces gall. It kind of excretes thought. And so that's what's going on. And there's a bunch of stuff out there that I'm sort of experiencing. And so, that's a little weird because that's real, and the brain, the mind, what's that? I mean, that's the modern view of it. And so this would seem a little weird from that standpoint, because obviously there's a thing out there, and there's got to be, if I have a bad understanding of it, then it's not going to be like the thing. I mean, I suppose if I understand it well, I've got it, but it's sort of backwards. Where, see, the traditional view is different, because the traditional view says, the material is secondary. What's primary is the spiritual, right? And so again, this Platonic idea of things, there's these underlying patternings of things, and everything is a manifestation of a Platonic idea, right? And therefore, and really, like I said before in the introduction, we're talking about relationships. And so this is getting at this idea that, okay, you can you understand the Platonic idea of things, you can see through the underlying spiritual patterning, and therefore, that's what's going on. I have a little bit weirder thing, because this is coming out of my Buddhist background, and I've also been reading a lot of this tantric non-dualism. So that, in their view, there is nothing material at all. Everything is mind, everything is consciousness. And it's not your consciousness, because in Buddhism, you don't even exist as an individual self. So the reason there's no difference between the thing sought and in the mind is because everything is consciousness. And if you think about it, you don't have, like, for example, this pen. This pen is not going into my mind. What's happening is that I'm having a mental image of it, right? That, even in the modern view, there's a sense perceptions, and that's being transmitted to my eyes, and that's been to the brain or whatever. So I'm not experiencing the actual reality of this pen. I'm only interacting with my mind. Everything is mental, right? And so we don't have any proof that this actually exists, right? Because all we have is our conception of it. So that's that too, is the consciousness only. So that's kind of trippy too. Now, whose consciousness, though? It's not as if I, Chris, the ego self, is creating reality, right? I mean, in the non-dual view, consciousness of everything is united, and it's sort of filtered through these individual things, but it's, no matter who's looking, all these different eyes, it's the same consciousness looking out of them. So that's kind of getting into, that's getting really woohoo, but again, if you're going to do traditional astrology, you need to understand the traditional worldview. And in the traditional worldview, the spiritual is primary. And so the organization of that spiritual, reality is from the one originally. And then, the classic sort of astrological formulation of it is that you have the one, and like the soul of the world, the anima mundi, and individual thoughts, and those manifest through the planets at the intermediate level, or the celestial the stars and everything, and then manifest as a material world. So it's just an interesting kind of opening a little bit of a window there and saying, you know what, our view of reality, that the material things are the primary things and the most important thing, is not how they saw things traditionally. And again, the modern view is everything's random. So if you're going to try to do astrology, which posits that there's a patterning to everything, and use a modern view, it's going to be problematic. You need to kind of step away from that and be open to that traditional view and open to the idea that there's a patterning to everything, and that's what we do as astrologers. We're using the celestial cycles, right, to see the underlying spiritual pattern that's really, that we're following, in whatever circumstance we're looking at. So I think it's a very interesting aphorism, one traditionally medieval, but it is even getting into my whole Buddhist consciousness only kind of conception, which is like, really, there is nothing but mind, and that everything we interact with is mental, right? And ultimately the view there is that there is no material reality. This is really a dream, but you're not the dreamer. You're being dreamed. So for example, in a dream, when you talk to other people, that's a dream character. But by focusing on the I, that's also a dream character too. So there's some really heavy stuff if you want to go with it. Now, if that seems crazy to who doesn't know what I'm talking about, that's okay. But I just thought I would throw that in there because that's, this is, again, a portal into this deeper levels of understanding. So you engage with it at whatever level you want to. But I think certainly from an astrological standpoint, there's a lot of interesting stuff that flows out of that second aphorism.
Well, yeah. So I will jump in. And I think that second aphorism is supposed to help you get on that road. Some of these are like koans. Some of them, they're not. And this is one of the ones that really is like a koan to me, because it starts off, when he that asketh the question shall better consider it. So you're already kind of starting to think about it. It's like, well, what is it that's happening when somebody's asking a question? And what is it that their desire that they're having in mind? Because it talks specifically to that, because he shall find that there is but little difference between the thing sought and the idea thereof in the mind. So you have that whole, what is the thing that you're seeking, and what is the idea of the thing that you're seeking, and really starting to see where those are the same thing and where those aren't the same thing. And you'll realize they have more in common than they have not in common. So it sets you down the road that you just took us down. But if you really take the time to consider that one yourself, I think that it's going to lead to that kind of maturity. But it's one of those things that you'll have to contemplate. And I think that's kind of the case with most of the aphorisms. And you pointed out, I think between shows last time we talked, something along the lines of that, some of these are simple, like it's just like this in the third house means that. And that's totally true. But with many of these, they really are meant to be memorized and contemplated, and you're supposed to really dive into them and consider the ramifications thereof. And this is definitely one of those times, because it's plugging you into that Neoplatonic worldview. And I mean, you've kind of alluded to Porphyry a lot. And that seems to be one of your influences, and I might be wrong with that, but that's kind of, you typically, I think you're leaning a little bit more towards Porphyry than like Al-Kindi in your approach. And this definitely plays into that.
I'm really actually more towards like Nagarjuna. I have this weird overlay that, my operating system is, this Buddhist, non-dual, approach. And so, yeah, because I just think that's really, and that's what one of the things I'd say about it too, is that I think that you want to have a philosophy, and know what that philosophy is. Because if you don't know what your philosophy is, then you have an unconscious philosophy. Everyone has a philosophy. So I'm just a pragmatist. That's a philosophy, And if you don't know what it is, and you don't know how you're operating, then it controls you unconsciously, And so, but I like this one a lot. It's like, the more I think about this, the more I'm sort of trippy, because I'm like, this is a trippy. It's like well, it's also what are you thinking? Because what you think, the thing that you're seeking isn't really the thing itself, is it? Anyway.
No.
I mean, you want it for a particular purpose. You're not really seeing what it is in itself. So even if you think the thing is an objective reality, right? So, I think it's interesting because the Tibetans say they say, well, there has to be an objective reality because, I see a pen and you see a pen. They say, no, that's just because we have similar karma, right? We're connected by our karma. So we have a similar experience of it. And like, if you're a fish, you see the river as a palace, right? Whereas a human, you see it as water. If you're a hell being, you see it as fire, right? If you're a god, you see it as a soma, as nectar. So, and that's true. You think of everyone's experience is different too, or your cultural conditioning is different, so it's, the objective reality too. How would you know there's an objective reality? Because you're only seeing, all you experience is in mind, right? And so but again, that's like, no, I believe in objective reality. I'm like, okay, that's cool. Believe in objective reality. But, again, this is a lot of interesting doors here. Just like you said, there's a lot of possibility for contemplation, a lot of jumping off points. And it's not for an argument. What it is sort of being tickled. It's like telling a joke. It's like, you either get the joke or you don't, and if you don't like the joke, you don't think it's funny, that's fine too. And that's what I would say. Like a koan is that way too. You never learn anything from a koan. No one ever learned anything from a koan, because the purpose of a koan is to show that the master or the student is, to show their level of awareness. And it's not something to be figured out. If you figured it out, you didn't get it. And whereas this is, I think it does have that quality. If you really contemplated this, you'd trip your brains out. So definitely worth some thought if it intrigues you.